And we'll start discussing in part 2 other classical perspectives. Okay, so module 34, we'll start to get into this. And what we're going to do is we're going to see how these build on Freud. And what we're going to see that Maslow and Rogers focus on what we call more the humanistic theories of personality. And with these humanistic theories, in the 1960s, Rogers and Maslow start to become some of the psychologists that begin to reject this kind of dehumanizing idea of behaviorism and this dysfunctional view of people in this psychodynamic thought. Okay, so remember, behaviorism is this idea that we understand people's behaviors by whether they're rewarded or punished. And that's kind of dehumanizing in the fact that it diminishes the fact that we think, we process, we evaluate our rewards. We do a lot of cognitive thinking. The idea behind behaviorism is that we don't. If you reward someone, they're going to act one way. If you punish them, they'll act another way. They also didn't think that the psychodynamic thought was very positive. So Freud's looking at really extreme, strange cases in terms of individuals not being able to use their limbs because of psychological reasons. And he's taking really extreme cases and then drawing conclusions about how people feel in general, how they function in general. And so humanistic theorists say this is problematic. So what Maslow and Rogers thought to offer was a third perspective, and that's this humanistic perspective. And so it's this third force kind of saying, well, let's think about things in a different way. And their approach in this case was to study healthy people rather than people with mental health problems. Okay, so we're going to understand how someone's successful, how they deal with different psychological issues, how they work with things, okay, how they function successfully in life. Let's look at healthy people rather than those who are having these mental health issues. And from this, they start to focus more on the conditions that support healthy personal growth. So what are the things that you can do to make yourself kind of more successful, to reach this kind of pinnacle of who you are and how you want to be? So, on Facebook, you'll see all kinds of different things, different media platforms on suggestions on how to kind of manage the COVID virus, this isolation that we're feeling. And, one of the therapists that I know is on there, she's a social worker, posts kind of things about how to, help yourself, how to help this kind of healthy personal growth during this experience, to kind of acknowledge the difficulties you might be having. In this case, she's taking a humanistic approach where she's saying, well, how do you be successful in this situation? How do you help yourself grow and become a stronger person, make it through this time? And that's really the focus of this humanistic theory. Rather than thinking about people that have mental health issues or these kind of dramatic experiences, rather let's focus on how people are healthy, how we can help them be healthy. So we'll start first with kind of thinking about Maslow. And Maslow's position on this is that when he talks about personal growth, he talks about it as this idea of self-actualization. And in self-actualization, the idea here is that people are motivated to keep moving up a hierarchy of needs, growing beyond having their basic needs met. Okay, so reaching towards this pinnacle of self-actualization. And this is what we have when we start to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or his pyramid of needs. And I'll say that Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a classic theory. It's one that actually I use in my research. It comes up quite a bit. It's actually very relevant to what's going on now. So starting first, when we talk about the very top of this hierarchy, when we talk about what we're really trying to do, we're working towards self-actualization. The idea here is that you're going to fulfill one's potential. You're going to self-transcend. You're going to be self-aware, self-accepting, open, ethical, spontaneous, loving, caring. You're going to possess all these very, very positive qualities. So you understand, your limitations, where you're less successful. You're going to be accepting of your flaws. So that's one of the things that people are really stressing now as you're at home, is be self-accepting if you're having a bad day, if you're getting behind on something, if you're struggling with something. Being open about this, being willing to share with others. Being loving and caring, supporting others around you. And you guys are all working towards self-actualization by working on your degree, working on your education, so you can get that job that's fulfilling, helps you be successful in terms of who you are. Now, Maslow says before we can reach that self-actualization, though, we need to address some of these basic needs here. And the first need he says we need to have is physiological needs. So in this case, we need to have our basic need for hunger satisfied, to have water, that we have we're not ill or sick or things like that. So before you can do anything related to self-actualization, you need these basic physiological needs met. Okay? You need to be able to get food. one of the things that we see a demonstration of this is that when children go to school, a lot of times school systems will offer a free breakfast to students, or even free lunches. And some of the pushback on this is that this is a frivolous program. It's not really beneficial. But in fact, what research suggests is that if a child's hungry, if they don't have this basic physiological need met, they're not going to be able to work towards self-actualization, not going to be able to learn anything because that basic need isn't being met. Similarly, in terms of safety need, do you have secure environment around you? Do you have security of food? Are you feeling protected? If individuals don't have this, they're not able to be successful. So OSU Newark, has means to, in temporary situations, if someone's in a bad situation at home, to be able to find them someplace to stay that's safe, to meet these safety needs. Same thing with kids in elementary through high school, making sure that they have a safe home to be in. We see that the next need that we have is, again, another drive that we have, is a belonging need. We want to have connections with others. Okay, we want to feel loved and supported. And many of us are not getting this belonging need met because we're not able to interact with those that we care about, our friends, our loved ones, romantic partners in some cases. And this last need he talks about before the self-actualization is this esteem need. Okay, so this esteem need being, feeling positive about yourself. If you feel positive towards yourself, you're able to then work towards being self-actualized, realizing the limitations that you have. So again, Maslow says, hey, if you understand if someone's healthy, you want to help them address these needs so they can get towards that self-actualization, building towards this healthy person. Rogers thinks about things slightly different. He agrees that people have a natural tendency to grow, to become healthy, and move towards that self-actualization. So he's aligned with Maslow in this idea that we want to have this self-actualization where we're open, we're positive, we're able to take on challenges, we're self-accepting. Rogers suggests we approach this through 3 different ways that facilitate growth. The first condition that we see that facilitates growth is being genuine. So being honest, direct, not using a facade. So the idea here is that when you're talking with others, you're sharing how you're really feeling. You're being honest with them. Okay, you're being direct in terms of your communication, so you're sharing exactly how you feel. You're not trying to sidestep it or say it in a different way. And you're not putting on a fake facade. It's this idea of kind of putting on this mask, making things appear as they're not really. So I was actually talking with my old roommate after college, who's a clinical therapist, and we were talking about kind of all these posts on Facebook where people are talking about these great things they're doing as parents and how they're creating obstacle courses and incorporating education into these obstacle courses, all these amazing, crazy, awesome things. And we were saying, well, we wondered how genuine that was. So how much is this really what they're doing, or how much is this kind of a false facade? Okay, so we joked about how we were going to put things on Facebook and other posts, how we were failing as dads and what the real truth was. Okay, in that case, we would be demonstrating genuineness. The second piece of this is the idea of demonstrating acceptance. So having this unconditional positive regard, acknowledging our feelings without passing judgment. Okay, so this idea that you might say, well, hey, I'm feeling really kind of overwhelmed. But instead of saying I'm feeling overwhelmed because I'm not keeping up, or because I'm not doing a good job with things, or because I'm not being concerned about things, I can say, well, I'm feeling overwhelmed because that's just kind of how I feel. This is a tough time to go through. And so you're not going to have this evaluative judgment. You're not going to put some kind of negative feeling towards it. And the last piece, and I think the one that's maybe most important to this, is that you're going to start to become more empathetic. So you're tuning in, I should say, into the feelings of others. So you're trying to understand why they're experiencing something. You're going to listen to them carefully. Okay? You're going to try to take their perspective. And in doing that, you start to extend yourself. You start to have kind of growth as you start to be able to take other people's perspectives. As again, something we try to do with kids, try to kind of teach them empathy, kind of teach them to be able to take that perspective of someone else. And partly that's because it helps them reach this self-actualization. Okay? So again, when we want to facilitate growth according to Rogers, we're going to see this in terms of helping to be more genuine, being honest with yourself, accepting, understanding our limitations without being critical of them, and empathy, that you're starting to take other people's perspectives. And when we talk about person-centered client therapy, so we'll get to talk about therapy towards the end here, we'll talk about how therapists work on these 3 key pieces, how they're really the foundation for client therapy in terms of this kind of new perspective. All right, so let me address one last piece. I'm going to kind of lay things out for us. Okay? Don't feel the need to get this all written down by any means, but this kind of shows us this contrast between kind of more psychodynamic theorists versus kind of psychodynamic theorists such as Freud. Okay? So idea with kind of Adler, Jung, and Horney is to say that, hey, there's importance of unconscious relationships in childhood. They influence who we are later on. The id, ego, and superego are important structures of personality. And the defense mechanisms also help us understand why we have anxiety about certain things. Okay? But the idea here is they start to differ a little bit in terms of believing that anxiety and personality are not functions of social, are functions of social but not sexual tensions. Okay, so this idea is that someone's having anxiety, they're having difficulties. It's not because of sexual tensions. It's not because they didn't successfully get through the psychosexual stages, but there's a function of having difficult social relationships. Jung believed in kind of collective unconscious, which is kind of a container of images from our species experiences. Kind of, we might think about this as culture. And it's not just really kind of repressed wishes or memories that are driving someone, but more kind of how we share kind of common beliefs, common images together that gets kind of passed, especially in our case, through media. So this is kind of setting us up with kind of some of the basic history. We'll use some of the psychodynamic thinking in terms of our therapy, but this kind of closed out module 34. Let me pause at this point to see if you have any questions I can address before let's talk about kind of more modern versions of thinking about personality.